The rain here falls differently than in Rome, seeping into the earth with a slow, heavy rhythm that has worn down the bones of this island for centuries. I sit by the fire, the flames casting long, dancing shadows against the rough stone walls of my villa at Tusculum. The heat is gentle, a stark contrast to the biting winds of the north I once commanded with such steady hands. My fingers, now still and resting on my lap, remember the weight of the gladius, the rough texture of the pilum, the damp chill of the Scottish mist that clung to my cloak like a second skin. There is a silence now, a profound quiet that fills the spaces where the roar of legions once stood so loudly. I listen to the wind moving through the olive trees outside, a sound that requires no translation, no interpretation of tribal dialects or military signals. It is just the wind, just the rain, just the fire crackling in the hearth. In this quiet, the memories do not feel like a burden, but like a landscape I have finally returned to after a long journey. The empire stretches out in my mind, a vast tapestry of conquest and administration, but here, in the dim light, it is only the crackle of wood and the steady breath of the night. I close my eyes, and the cold waters of the Firth of Forth rise up, not as a challenge, but as a memory of water and stone, of a world that was wild and untamed, and of the man who walked its edges. The afternoon light fell softly across the stone floors of a quiet villa in Forum Julii, where my early years began. Dust motes danced in the warm, beams that streamed through the open archways, swirling in slow, aimless circles. A small bronze statue of a philosopher stood on a marble pedestal near the window, its surface worn smooth by the gentle touch of many hands over the years. Outside, the scent of lavender and rosemary drifted in from the garden beyond the courtyard, mixing with the dry heat of the stone. Bees hummed lazily around the blooming flowers in the terracotta pots, their wings beating a soft, steady rhythm. The sound of a distant fountain provided a constant, soothing pulse to the stillness of the room. A scroll lay unrolled on a wooden desk, its ink faded, but still legible in the soft light. The pages spoke of Stoic philosophy, of duty and self-control, of the virtue that lies in doing what is right without seeking reward. The woven wool rug beneath the feet invited one to sit and simply breathe, to let the world turn without needing to steer it. The warmth of the fading sunlight on the stone walls created a comforting embrace for the weary traveler. Time seemed to slow down in this peaceful corner, allowing the mind to wander without purpose or urgency. The gentle glow of the lamp illuminated the simple beauty of the everyday objects scattered around the room. It was a place where the cares of the world could be set aside and forgotten for a moment. The atmosphere was heavy with the scent of peace, wrapping around the observer like a soft, warm blanket. In this quiet sanctuary, The past and present merged into a single, tranquil moment of stillness. The world outside continued its endless cycle, but here, in this small room, everything was perfectly calm. The silence was not empty, but filled with the quiet presence of history and the promise of rest. It was a space designed for the soul to find its way back to a state of natural harmony. The gentle light faded slowly as the day turned into night, leaving the room in a soft, blue twilight. The flame of the lamp continued to burn steadily, a small beacon of warmth in the growing darkness. The quiet of the room deepened, inviting a deep and restful sleep to those who entered its peaceful embrace. I remember the political storms that raged when I was young, the chaos of the Year of the Four, emperors that shook the foundations of the world. I chose to support the eventual victor, Vespasian, a decision that secured my future and allowed me to rise through the ranks of the imperial administration. The Civil War created a chaotic environment for all Roman citizens and soldiers alike. Yet I found my path through the turmoil. Agricola served as a military tribune in Britain, gaining valuable experience in the frontier provinces of the empire. The facts of my birth and family are clear, even if some details remain obscure to the historians who study my life. The narrative of my life is one of the rain here falls differently than in Rome. Yet the memory of my earliest years begins in a place of dry, golden heat. I was born in Forum Julii, in the province of Gallia Narbonensis, a land of sun and vines far from the gray mists of the north. My father, Lucius Julius Agricola, was a man of the equestrian order, a respected senator who taught me that the pursuit of wisdom was as vital as the pursuit of glory. He was a man of Stoic principles, believing that virtue lay in duty and self-control, a lesson that would anchor my entire life. The shadow of his sudden and violent death fell across my childhood before I could truly remember his face. I was an infant when the violence took him, leaving my mother to guide me through the quiet corridors of our family home. The loss shaped the early environment of my upbringing in the province, where silence often spoke louder than words. I grew up under the care of my mother and the steady guidance of my extended family network. They filled the void left by my father with a deep sense of honor and a fierce dedication to our lineage. The family moved to Rome when I was old enough to begin my formal education, a journey that marked the beginning of my integration into the highest circles of Roman society. In the capital, I studied under the tutelage of the famous philosopher Lucius Annius Seneca. He was a close friend of my mother and a leading intellectual figure of the age, his presence filling the rooms with a calm authority. I absorbed the teachings of Stoicism, which would later guide my conduct as a general and governor when the chaos of war threatened to overwhelm reason. I also received instruction in the arts of rhetoric and public speaking from other distinguished teachers who valued clarity above ornamentation. My education was thorough and designed to prepare me for a career in the service of the state, a path laid out by generations before me. The young man showed a natural aptitude for learning and a serious dedication to his studies, finding joy in the slow unraveling of complex ideas. I balanced my intellectual pursuits with a growing interest in military affairs and strategy, watching the legions march through the streets with a keen eye. This dual focus on philosophy and warfare became a hallmark of my later character and achievements, a synthesis of the mind and the sword. The historical record does not provide many specific details about my childhood games or daily routines, leaving those moments to the imagination. We know only that I was raised with the values of duty, honor, and service to Rome, values that were woven into the fabric of my being. The silence of the sources regarding my early play suggests a life focused on serious preparation, where even leisure had a purpose. I was groomed from a young age to follow in the footsteps of my ancestors in public office, carrying their names with pride. The transition from my provincial birthplace to the heart of the empire was a significant journey, one that expanded my horizons beyond the familiar hills of Gaul. It marked the beginning of my integration into the highest circles of Roman society, where I learned to navigate the complex web of politics and power. My education laid the foundation for the remarkable career that would follow in the coming decades, a career built on the bedrock of early lessons. The influence of my mother and my father's memory remained with me throughout my life, a constant companion in both victory and defeat. I carried the legacy of my family's service and the lesson of my father's martyrdom, a reminder that life can be cut short by the whims of fate. These early experiences forged the character of the man who would later conquer Britain, shaping a soul capable of enduring great hardships. The quiet years of my youth prepared me for the storms of political and military life, teaching me patience and resilience. I entered the military as a tribune under the governor Suetonius Paulinus in Britain, a posting that would define the next phase of my existence. This first posting occurred between the years 59 and 60, one of the Common Era, a time of great unrest and conflict on the island. It was the start of a long and distinguished military career that spanned several decades, a journey of blood and stone. The early life of Agricola was a period of learning, loss, and preparation for great things, a necessary prologue to the epic that followed. The seeds of my future greatness were sown in the soil of my childhood and education, nurtured by the hands of those who loved me. The afternoon light fell softly across the stone floors of a quiet villa in Forum Julii, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the warm beams. A small bronze statue of a philosopher stood on a marble pedestal near the window, its surface worn smooth by the gentle touch of many hands over the years. Outside, the scent of lavender and rosemary drifted in from the garden beyond the courtyard, mingling with the dry heat of the stone. Bees hummed lazily around the blooming flowers in the terracotta pots, their low vibration a constant rhythm in the stillness of the room. A scroll lay unrolled on a wooden desk, its ink faded but still legible in the soft light, speaking of ancient wisdom and Stoic philosophy. The woven wool rug beneath the feet invited one to sit and simply breathe, its texture rough yet comforting against the skin. The warmth of the fading sunlight on the stone walls created a comforting embrace for the weary traveler, slowing time itself. It was a place where the cares of the world could be set aside and forgotten for a moment, a sanctuary of peace. The atmosphere was heavy with the scent of peace, wrapping around the observer like a soft, warm blanket, shielding them from the outside world. In this quiet sanctuary, the past and present merged into a single, tranquil moment of stillness, free from urgency or demand. The world outside continued its endless cycle, but here, in this small room, everything was perfectly calm and ordered. The silence was not empty, but filled with the quiet presence of history and the promise of rest, a deep and abiding quiet. It was a space designed for the soul to find its way back to a state of natural harmony, where the mind could rest. The gentle light faded slowly as the day turned into night, leaving the room in a soft, blue twilight that held no fear. The flame of the lamp continued to burn steadily, a small beacon of warmth in the growing darkness, guiding the way. The quiet of the room deepened, inviting a deep and restful sleep to those who entered its peaceful embrace, a final surrender to the night. The family home in Forum Julii remained a place of memory and origin for the future general, a touchstone for all that followed. The legacy of my grandfathers and father provided a strong framework for my own ambitions, a structure upon which I could build. I moved through the ranks of the Roman state with grace and determination, never losing sight of the lessons learned in those early days. The early years were quiet compared to the later years of conquest and administration. Yet they were essential in shaping the man who would become one of Rome's greatest generals. The story of my life begins with these formative experiences in Gaul and Rome, where the foundations were laid with care. The details of my birth and family background set the stage for my future achievements, a script written long before I took the stage. The historical record preserves the key facts of my origin and early education for us to know, a testament to the enduring nature of truth. These facts allow us to understand the context of my later actions and decisions, providing a map of the terrain I once crossed. The early life of Agricola was marked by the influence of great men and tragic events, a tapestry of light and shadow. It was a life that began in the sun-drenched south of France and moved to the center of power, a journey of transformation. The journey from Forum Julii to the Senate was a path of honor and service, paved with the stones of duty. The boy, who was born in 40 CE, grew into a man of immense capability and virtue, shaped by the forces of his time. My early life remains a subject of study. For those interested in Roman history and biography, a chapter of resilience and triumph. The facts of my birth and family are clear, even if some details remain obscure, like the faces in 77 AD. The governorship of Britain was placed into my hands, a heavy mantle of responsibility that settled on my shoulders with the weight of stone. I did not hesitate to lead my legions against the targets that lay before us, for delay in the face of disorder only invites chaos to take root. The march north was a rhythm of iron-shod hooves and the creak of leather, a steady pulse that moved through the damp, green landscape. We built forts and settlements as we advanced, raising walls of timber and earth that stood as silent sentinels against the wild. These structures were not merely shelters for the weary soldier, but symbols of a power that sought to be permanent in a land that resisted all change. I watched the smoke of the forges rise into the gray sky, a dark plume that marked the boundary between the known and the unknown. The air smelled of wet wool, damp wood, and the sharp tang of iron being shaped by hammer and fire. My men worked with a quiet efficiency, their breath visible in the cold morning air as they dug foundations into the rocky soil. There was no fanfare in this labor, only the necessary work of securing the frontier against the tribes that watched from the hills. I walked the perimeter of each new fort, my boots sinking slightly into the mud, feeling the solidity of the earth beneath the rising walls. The silence of the construction sites was broken only by the rhythmic thud of hammers and the occasional shout of an overseer directing the placement of a heavy timber. I remember the day the first fort at Inchtuthil was fully enclosed, a massive square of earth and timber that seemed to grow out of the ground like a sudden stone. The scale of the project was immense, designed not just to house a legion, but to serve as a supply depot for the push further into the north. The workers moved with a purpose that transcended mere labor, driven by the vision of a road that would connect this remote outpost to the rest of the empire. The forest around us was ancient and deep, the trees standing like silent witnesses to the intrusion of Roman order. I ran my hand along the rough bark of an oak, feeling the grooves and ridges that told the story of centuries of growth before my arrival. The contrast between the wild forest and the geometric precision of the fort was stark, a testament to the will of man against the indifference of nature. The river nearby flowed with a cold, clear current, its sound a constant companion to the noise of construction. I sat for a long time on a fallen log, watching the water rush over the stones, thinking of the years that would pass before this place was abandoned or repurposed. The empire was vast, but here in the north, it felt fragile, a thin line of order drawn against the chaos of the wilderness. The legacy of my time in Britain was preserved not by the stones I laid or the roads I built, but by the careful pen of a man who knew me well. Tacitus wrote without anger or the feverish zeal of a propagandist, his words flowing with a calm clarity that has outlasted the empires he described. He captured the spirit of an era and the character of a man who served Rome with distinction, even when the political winds shifted dangerously. The biography stands as a testament to a life of action and service, recorded in the stillness of a quiet room far from the noise of the legions. It remains the only major work that details the specific events of my military and political career, a singular light in the darkness of forgotten history. Historians continue to study this text to understand the complexities of Roman rule in Britain, picking apart the sentences to find the truth beneath the rhetoric. The absence of other contemporary sources makes the work of Tacitus even more valuable, a single thread that holds together the tapestry of a lost world. My life was one of movement and command, yet it is the stillness of the written word that has kept it alive. The story of my achievements in Britain was told with care and respect by the historian who was also my son-in-law, a bond that transcended the battlefield. The text provides a clear picture of a man who sought to bring order to the frontiers of the empire, a task that required both the sword and the plow. My work in Britain laid the groundwork for centuries of Roman presence in the region, even though the exact numbers of those who fell in battle remain uncertain. The silence of the past speaks through the words of Tacitus, offering a glimpse into the life of a general who walked the edges of the known world. The narrative flows smoothly from the early campaigns to the final battles in the north, a journey that is complete and self-contained within the pages of the ancient manuscript. It serves as a lasting monument to the memory of a great Roman general, a figure who defined the limits of the empire in the north. The work continues to be read and studied by those interested in the history of the Roman Empire, a testament to the power of memory. The legacy of my life endures through the careful and thoughtful writing of Tacitus, ensuring that my contributions to the empire will never be entirely forgotten. The text remains a vital source for understanding the history of Britain and the Roman world, a bridge between the past and the present. I recall the campaign against the Caledonians, the decisive engagement that likely occurred in the late summer or early autumn of 83 or perhaps 84. The precise geographical location of this famous battle remains elusive to modern scholars despite extensive archaeological efforts, a mystery that time has not solved. Researchers continue to debate the exact site where the Roman legions faced the Caledonian tribes, arguing over the landscape and the evidence of the earth. Even with growing contributions from archaeology, consensus on the battlefield location has not yet been reached, leaving the exact spot to the imagination. The Roman military infrastructure in Britain included major frontier fortresses designed to secure the northern advances, and Inchuthil served as a significant Roman frontier, fortress and supply depot, rather than a civilian settlement. The occupation of this strategic site occurred between 83 and 86 AD during my governorship, a period of intense activity and expansion. Roman road links were constructed to connect Inchuthil to the fortress at Bertha and other outlying positions, creating a network that facilitated the movement of troops and supplies across the rugged Scottish landscape. These roads were the arteries of the empire, carrying the lifeblood of the legions to the furthest reaches of the north. The silence of the past is broken by the sound of the wind, a constant presence that has blown over these hills for millennia. The rain falls differently here than in Rome, seeping into the earth with a slow, heavy rhythm that has worn down the bones of the island. I sit by the fire, the flames casting long, dancing shadows against the stone walls of my villa, feeling the gentle heat on my face. The heat is a stark contrast to the biting winds of the north I once commanded, a reminder of the distance between the present and the past. My hands, now still, remember the weight of the gladius, the rough texture of the pilum, the damp chill of the Scottish mist that clung to my cloak like a second skin. There is a silence now, a profound quiet that fills the spaces where the roar of legions once stood. I listen to the wind moving through the olive trees, a sound that requires no translation, no interpretation of tribal dialects or military signals. It is just the wind, just the rain, just the fire. In this quiet, the memories do not feel like a burden, but like a landscape I have finally returned to. The empire stretches out in my mind, a vast tapestry of conquest and administration, but here, in the dim light, it is only the crackle of wood and the steady breath of the night. I close my eyes, and the cold waters of the Firth of Forth rise up, not as a challenge, but as a memory of water and stone, of a world that was wild and untamed, and of the man who walked its edges. The construction of the fortress at Inchuthil was a feat of engineering that defied the rugged terrain, a testament to the ability of the Roman mind to impose order on chaos. The timber used for the palisades was felled from the surrounding forests, the trees falling with a crash that echoed through the valley. The earth was moved by the thousands of hands of the legionaries, creating a rampart that rose high above the ground. The stone foundations were laid with precision, each block fitted together with a care that would have lasted for centuries had the empire not eventually retreated. The river that ran beside the fortress provided a constant source of water, its cold flow a lifeline for the men who guarded the northern border. I walked the perimeter of the fortress often, my boots crunching on the gravel path, feeling the solidity of the walls that rose around me. The silence of the construction site was a deep and resonant thing, broken only by the rhythmic sounds of labor and the occasional call of a bird. The fortress stood as a beacon of Roman power, a symbol of the empire's reach into the heart of the wilderness. It was a place of order in a land of chaos, a small island of civilization in a sea of wildness. The political atmosphere of the time was tense, as Vespasian consolidated power and established the Flavian dynasty. I navigated the dangerous waters of imperial politics. The rain here falls differently than in Rome. It does not drum against the marble. It seeps into the earth, a slow, heavy rhythm that has worn down the bones of this island for centuries. I sit by the fire, the flames casting long, dancing shadows against the stone walls of my villa at Tusculum. The heat is gentle, a stark contrast to the biting winds of the north I once commanded. My hands, now still, remember the weight of the gladius, the rough texture of the pilum, the damp chill of the Scottish mist that clung to my cloak like a second skin. There is a silence now, a profound quiet that fills the spaces where the roar of legions once stood. I listen to the wind moving through the olive trees, a sound that requires no translation, no interpretation of tribal dialects or military signals. It is just the wind, just the rain, just the fire. In this quiet, the memories do not feel like a burden, but like a landscape I have finally returned to. The empire stretches out in my mind, a vast tapestry of conquest and administration, but here, in the dim light, it is only the crackle of wood and the steady breath of the night. I close my eyes, and the cold waters of the Firth of Forth rise up, not as a challenge, but as a memory of water and stone, of a world that was wild and untamed, and of the man who walked its edges. The year was 77 when I first set foot on the soil of Caledonia, a land that seemed to reject the very concept of order. The air tasted of peat and damp heather, a sharpness that stung the lungs and cleared the mind of all but the most essential thoughts. I led the legions north, not with the frantic energy of a conqueror seeking glory, but with the deliberate pace of a builder laying stones for a foundation that might outlast the mountains themselves. The terrain was a living thing, shifting and resisting, with bogs that swallowed the wheels of supply carts and hills that hid the movements of the tribes. We moved through valleys where the silence was so deep it felt like a physical weight, broken only by the rhythmic clatter of armor and the low murmur of commands. The locals watched from the ridges, their faces pale in the gray light, their eyes tracking our progress with a mixture of fear and a strange, unyielding curiosity. They knew we were there to change the shape of their world, to replace their winding tracks with straight lines, and their scattered dwellings with the rigid geometry of Roman walls. I recall the construction of the great fortress at Inch-Tooth-Hill, a site chosen for its commanding view over the valley and the river that flowed nearby. The ground was hard, the stone stubborn, but the men worked with a steady hand, driven by the knowledge that this place would become a hub of power. We drove piles into the earth, their wooden hearts rotting slowly, even as we built upon them. A reminder that nothing human is truly permanent. The River Tay, which ran north of the fortress in those days, carried the silt of the highlands and the echoes of our marching feet. It was a vital artery, connecting our scattered outposts and allowing us to move troops and grain across the rugged landscape with a speed that surprised even the locals. The road we built was a scar of order on the wild face of the land, a ribbon of crushed stone and packed earth that stretched from the fortress at Bertha to the northernmost edges of our reach. It was a testament to the belief that distance could be conquered, that the wild could be tamed by the sheer force of will and the precision of engineering. The strategy was simple in its ambition, to build a line of forts that would cut off the highlands and force the tribes into submission. These were not merely military outposts, but centers of a new way of life, places where the Roman custom of law and order was introduced alongside the sword. We built temples of white stone that gleamed against the gray sky, forums where disputes were settled by the weight of Roman law, and bathhouses where the steam rose in thick clouds, carrying the scent of oil and soap into the cold air. The local populations watched these structures rise, their eyes widening as they saw the transformation of their world. They saw the integration of their lands into the wider Roman world, a process that was at once terrifying and mesmerizing. The Flavian dynasty provided the support needed for these ambitious campaigns, sending the resources and the men required to push the boundaries of the empire as far as the natural limits of the land allowed. A single iron nail, forged in the fires of the legionary workshops, was found embedded in the timber of a granary at Inch-Tooth-Hill, a small object that spoke of the vast logistical network that sustained the army. It was a piece of metal, no larger than a finger, yet it held the weight of an empire's ambition. The nail had been driven deep into the wood, securing the beams that would hold tons of grain, a silent guardian of the supplies that kept the legions fed and moving. It was a reminder of the intricate web of connections that held the frontier together, a web of roads, rivers, and human effort that spanned the length of the island. The erosion of the years has since taken its toll, removing 30 meters of the northeast plateau where the fortress once stood. But the memory of that nail remains, a symbol of the strength and fragility of our work. The campaign that culminated at Mons Graupius was the culmination of years of preparation and maneuvering. The tribes had gathered in force, their numbers vast and their spirit unbroken, standing on the slopes of the mountain like a wall of flesh and iron. The air was thick with the sound of their chants, a low, rumbling vibration that could be felt in the chest as much as heard by the ear. I ordered the fleet to sail ahead, to plunder the coast and spread uncertainty among the enemy, a tactic designed to fracture their unity and weaken their resolve. The sight of the ships on the horizon, their sails billowing in the wind, was a terrifying spectacle for a people who knew only the land and its hidden paths. The fleet moved like a shadow across the water, leaving a trail of smoke and fear in its wake, a reminder that the sea was now as much a part of our domain as the soil. The battle itself was a test of discipline and endurance, a clash of two worlds that had been moving toward each other for so long. The Roman lines held firm, the shields locked together to form a wall that could not be broken, while the Britons charged with a ferocity that was both admirable and futile. The casualties were heavy on both sides, though the numbers reported by my son in-law Tacitus may be more a reflection of the rhetorical style of the time than the exact count of the dead. 360 Roman soldiers fell, a loss that was felt deeply in the camp, while the Britons suffered 10,000 deaths, a figure that speaks to the scale of the conflict and the ruthlessness of the Roman machine. The victory was decisive, but it was not a triumph of bloodlust. It was a victory of strategy and patience, a demonstration that the empire could endure the wild and impose its will upon it. The aftermath of the battle was a time of consolidation, of building the structures that would hold the peace. I reinforced the army with Britons whose loyalty had been proven during the long peace, men who understood the value of Roman order and were willing to serve it. The construction of forts and settlements continued, each one a brick in the wall that separated the known world from the unknown. The legacy of these campaigns was preserved in the quiet words of Tacitus, who wrote without anger or zeal, capturing the spirit of man who served Rome with distinction. The text remains the only major work that details the specific events of my military and political career, a testament to the complexities of Roman rule in Britain. The absence of other contemporary sources makes the work of Tacitus even more valuable, a window into a time when the empire was at its height and the world was being reshaped by the force of its will. The room where Tacitus likely composed this biography was quiet and filled with the soft light of a Roman afternoon. Dust motes danced slowly in the beams of sunlight that filtered through the high windows of the study. The walls were lined with shelves made of dark cedar wood, holding scrolls of papyrus bound in leather. A heavy oak desk stood in the center of the room, its surface worn smooth by years of use. Inkpots sat beside a bundle of reed pens, their tips dry and brittle, waiting to be dipped in the black liquid that would record the history of the empire. The silence of the room was a companion to the writer, a space where the past could be examined and the future imagined. The words flowed from the pen, capturing the life of a man who had walked the edges of the world and returned to tell the tale. The narrative of Agricola remains a testament to the reach and resilience of the Roman Empire, a story that continues to inspire those who study the history of Rome and the nature of leadership in times of political uncertainty. The physical remnants of the campaign still lie buried beneath the soil of modern Scotland. Silent stones that speak of a time when Rome sought to tame the wild northern frontiers. The quiet stone walls of Inchuthill stood silent against the gray sky of the Scottish Highlands, a monument to the ambition and the effort of a bygone era. Rain fell gently upon the eroded plateau, where the fortress once commanded the surrounding valley, washing away the layers of time and revealing the foundations of the past. The Tay River flowed nearby, its waters carrying the memory of Roman legions marching in disciplined ranks, a sound that has faded but never fully disappeared. Moss covered the fragmented foundations of the granaries and barracks, a green blanket that softened the harsh lines of the stone and returned the land to its natural state. Visitors who wander here often feel a deep sense of peace and connection to the distant past, a feeling that transcends the boundaries of time and language. The stillness of the place allows the mind to rest and the spirit to find calm reflection, a moment of quiet in a world that is often too loud and too fast. Modern historians continue to study the life of Agricola through the lens of Tacitus's biographical work, analyzing the text to understand the relationship between military conquest and political power in the Roman Empire. The biography provides valuable insights into the administrative practices and military strategies of the 1st century A.D., offering a glimpse into the mind of a man who sought to bring order to the frontiers of the empire. Researchers examine the text to determine how much of the narrative reflects historical fact versus literary embellishment, a task that requires patience and a deep understanding of the context. The work remains a crucial source for understanding the Roman presence in Britain and the broader imperial context, a document that has survived the ravages of time and the indifference. The rain here falls differently than in Rome. It does not drum against the marble. It seeps into the earth, a slow, heavy rhythm that has worn down the bones of this island for centuries. I sit by the fire, the flames casting long, dancing shadows against the stone walls of my villa at Tusculum. The heat is gentle, a stark contrast to the biting winds of the north I once commanded. My hands, now still, remember the weight of the gladius, the rough texture of the pilum, the damp chill of the Scottish mist that clung to my cloak like a second skin. There is a silence now, a profound quiet that fills the spaces where the roar of legions once stood. I listen to the wind moving through the olive trees, a sound that requires no translation, no interpretation of tribal dialects or military signals. It is just the wind, just the rain, just the fire. In this quiet, the memories do not feel like a burden, but like a landscape I have finally returned to. The empire stretches out in my mind, a vast tapestry of conquest and administration, but here, in the dim light, it is only the crackle of wood and the steady breath of the night. I close my eyes, and the cold waters of the Firth of Forth rise up, not as a challenge, but as a memory of water and stone, of a world that was wild and untamed, and of the man who walked its edges. The path from the misty northern frontier back to the heart of Rome was paved with a different kind of tension. I had driven the legions deep into the unknown lands of Caledonia, securing the submission of tribes that had never bowed to an eagle standard. The victory at Mons Graupia stood as the pinnacle of that campaign, a moment where the Roman order met the wild chaos of the north and held firm. Yet, the triumph felt hollow when the shadow of the emperor stretched long over the province. Domitian sat on the throne, a man whose eyes scanned the horizon for rivals rather than allies. The news from the capital arrived slowly, carried by messengers who seemed to age with every mile they traveled. They spoke of a court where suspicion was the currency of the realm, and where a successful general was often viewed as a threat to the stability of the throne. I felt the weight of that suspicion in the very air I breathed, a cold pressure that made the warm sun of Britain feel distant. My achievements in building roads and forts, which were meant to bring peace and order, were interpreted by some as the foundations of a personal kingdom. The silence of the court was louder than the battle cries of the Caledonians ever were. It was a silence that demanded caution, a silence that warned against any display of pride or ambition. I recalled the years spent in Aquitania, where I had learned the art of governance through diplomacy rather than the sword. Those years had taught me that the smooth administration of a province required a delicate balance of firmness and fairness. The people there had welcomed the Roman law, seeing it as a shield against the chaos of tribal warfare. I had walked the streets of their cities, feeling the stone under my sandals, listening to the merchants barter in Latin and local dialects. That work had earned me the title of patrician, a status that should have been a shield against the whims of power. Instead, it became a target. The elevation to the senatorial rank in 73 CE marked a turning point, not in my power, but in my vulnerability. The higher I climbed, the more visible I became to the jealous eyes of the emperor. The Senate, once a place of debate and honor, had become a theater of flattery and fear. Men spoke with their eyes, not their voices, knowing that a wrong word could lead to exile or death. I learned to navigate this treacherous landscape by keeping my head low and my work visible only where it served the empire. The recall from Britain was not a shout but a whisper. The orders came quietly, delivered by a courier who avoided my gaze. There was no grand ceremony, no fanfare to mark the end of my command. I simply packed my belongings, leaving the forts and the roads I had built to the care of my successors. The legions I had led through the mist and the mud were left to guard a frontier that stretched further than any Roman had ever gone before. I walked away from the northern winds, feeling the weight of the empire's expectations pressing down on my shoulders. The journey back to Rome was long and arduous, a slow retreat from the edge of the world to the center of power. As I traveled, I watched the landscape change from the rugged hills of the north to the rolling plains of Gaul, and finally to the stone streets of the capital. The city had changed while I was gone. The air smelled of incense and fear, a scent that clung to the marble columns and the crowded forums. The people moved with a hurried step, their eyes darting nervously, afraid to meet the gaze of the emperor's spies. I entered Rome with a small retinue, careful to avoid any display of triumph that might be misinterpreted. The streets were lined with statues of the emperor, their faces stern and unyielding. I passed the temples and the markets, feeling the pulse of a city that was alive yet held in a state of constant tension. My arrival was noted but not celebrated. The emperor received me in private, a meeting that lasted only a few moments. There were no questions about the battles fought or the lands conquered. Instead, the conversation turned to the weather and the state of the roads, topics that were safe and unthreatening. I understood the message clearly. My service was over, and my presence in the public eye was no longer desired. I retired to my home, a place that felt more like a prison than a sanctuary. The walls of the villa seemed to close in around me, blocking out the light and the sound of the city. I spent my days in the quiet corners of the house, reading the scrolls that had once inspired me, and writing the letters that now went unanswered. The silence of those final years was a stark contrast to the noise of my earlier life. I had spent decades leading men through the mud and the rain, shouting orders over the din of battle, and now I sat in a room where the only sound was the scratching of a pen on papyrus. My son-in-law, Tacitus, visited me often, bringing news from the outside world, and the warmth of his friendship. He spoke of the history of the empire, of the rise and fall of dynasties, and of the men who had shaped the world. I listened to his words, feeling a sense of peace settle over me. He was writing my story not as a tale of glory, but as a record of a life lived with integrity. He understood that the true measure of a man was not in the battles he won, but in the character he maintained in the face of adversity. The pages he filled with ink became a testament to the values I had tried to uphold, a reminder that virtue could survive even in the darkest times. The memory of the forts I had built in the north began to fade, replaced by the quiet rhythm of my daily life. I walked the gardens of the villa, watching the vines grow and the flowers bloom. The seasons changed, bringing the heat of summer and the chill of winter, but the world outside remained a distant memory. I thought of the soldiers who had served under me, men who had faced the cold, and the enemy with courage and loyalty. They were gone now, scattered across the empire or returned to their homes, their stories lost to time. I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the time I had been given, for the chance to serve the empire, and to live a life of purpose. The fear that had once gripped my heart had dissipated, replaced by a calm acceptance of the inevitable. I knew that my time was coming to an end, but I was not afraid. I had lived a full life, and I had kept my honor intact. The late afternoon sun cast long, golden shadows across the marble floor of a quiet Roman atrium. A single clay oil lamp sat on a low wooden table, its flame flickering with a soft, steady rhythm. Outside the open window, the gentle rustle of olive leaves provided a soothing backdrop to the stillness of the room. The air smelled faintly of dried lavender and old parchment, evoking a sense of deep, timeless peace. Dust motes danced slowly in the shaft of light that entered from the high clerestory window. A small bronze statue of a sleeping figure rested on a pedestal near the wall, its expression serene and untroubled. The silence of the room was profound, broken only by the distant, rhythmic chirping of crickets in the garden. This quiet space seemed to exist outside, the rush of the bustling city offering a The recall came with a letter that felt heavier than any sword I had ever drawn. 7 years of holding the northern frontier, of mapping rivers that no Roman had seen, of building roads through forests, that had never known a wheel. All ended in a single dispatch from Rome. The Emperor Domitian, a man whose face I had never truly seen but whose shadow fell across the entire empire, summoned me back. He wanted the glory of my victories for himself, yet he could not bear to see me standing in the light of my own success. The journey south was long and slow, the carriage wheels groaning over stones that had been worn smooth by centuries of traffic. I watched the landscape change from the gray, wet heath of Caledonia to the golden, sun-drenched hills of Italy. The air grew warmer, smelling of olive oil and drying herbs, a stark contrast to the damp peat and pine of the north. I carried no triumphal arch in my mind, no statues waiting to be unveiled in the Forum. Instead, I carried a quiet exhaustion that settled deep into the marrow of my bones. When I arrived in the capital, the city seemed to hold its breath. The streets were crowded, but the noise felt distant, like the sound of a storm heard from inside a deep cave. I returned to my home not as a conquering hero, but as a man who had been dismissed. The political sphere that had once defined every hour of my life now felt like a room where I was no longer welcome. I refused to seek new commands. I refused to walk the forums where men whispered about my name. I chose silence over the dangerous game of imperial favor. My wife and daughter were there to greet me, their faces the only things that mattered in this new, quiet world. We sat together in the atrium, the fountain splashing softly, a sound that needed no translation. The years of command were over. The legions were gone. The maps were rolled up and stored in the cedar chest. The days stretched out, long and unbroken by the urgency of war or the chaos of administration. I spent my time in the study, surrounded by scrolls that I had once used to plan campaigns, now used to read philosophy and history. The dust motes danced in the shafts of light that cut through the high windows, moving with a slow, deliberate grace that mirrored my own breathing. I learned to listen to the house settling, the creak of the wooden beams, the rustle of the ivy outside against the stone wall. It was a strange peace, one that felt earned rather than given. The emperor's jealousy had stripped me of my public life, but it had left me with something far more precious. It had given me back the ability to simply be. The silence of the room was not empty. It was filled with the weight of a life fully lived, a life that had touched the edges of the known world and returned. I walked through the garden in the early morning, when the air was cool and the dew still clung to the leaves of the lemon trees. The scent of the earth was rich and dark, a smell that spoke of growth and decay in equal measure. I touched the rough bark of the cypress, feeling the texture of years of growth under my fingertips. The world outside continued its slow and steady movement without me. The empire marched on, conquering new lands raising new statues, forgetting the men who had paved the way. But here, in this small corner of the world, time had slowed to a gentle pace. I remembered the faces of the men I had led, the hard eyes of the veterans, the young faces of the recruits who had grown old in my service. Some had fallen in the mud of the north, their names lost to the rain and the wind. Others had returned to Rome, their stories told in the baths and the markets. But here, in the quiet of my retirement, their voices were still clear. I could hear the command given in a low voice, the sound of the standard bearer's staff striking the ground, the rhythmic chant of the march. These sounds were no longer a call to action, but a memory of a time when I was needed. Now I was only needed by myself. The historical record of my final years is sparse. A few lines in a text written by a man who loved me. Some say that the emperor poisoned me, that the jealousy of the throne could not tolerate the virtue of a subject. They whisper of a cup of wine, of a sudden illness, of a death that came too soon. But the text does not offer proof, and the silence of the official records leaves the exact nature of my passing open to interpretation. Perhaps it was simply the weariness of 50, 3 years, a body that had run its course. Perhaps it was the slow, quiet fading that comes when the fire has burned low. The truth of the matter matters little now. The peace I found was real, and that is what remains. I sat by the window as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the floor. The light was golden and thick, like honey poured over the stone. It illuminated the simple objects in the room, the clay lamp, the wooden table, the woven rug that had been my companion for so many years. The flame of the lamp flickered gently, casting a warm glow on the walls. It was a time for rest and for the gentle closing of the eyes. The world outside continued its slow and steady movement without me. I was free from the demands of the empire and its endless wars. The silence of the room embraced me like a soft and heavy blanket. My breathing slowed to match the rhythm of the wind outside. There was no need to speak or to plan for the morrow. The day was done, and the night offered only peaceful stillness. The woven wool rug beneath the feet invited one to sit and simply breathe. Its fibers were coarse yet soft, dyed in deep reds and earthy browns that had faded slightly with the passing of seasons. The texture was irregular, a testament to the hands that had spun, the wool and the loom that had woven it. Each knot held a story of a life lived, a thread connecting the past to the present. The warmth of the fading sunlight on the stone walls created a comforting embrace for the weary traveler. Time seemed to slow down in this peaceful corner, allowing the mind to wander without purpose or urgency. The gentle glow of the lamp illuminated the simple beauty of the everyday objects scattered around the room. It was a place where the cares of the world could be set aside and forgotten for a moment. The atmosphere was heavy with the scent of peace, wrapping around the observer like a soft, warm blanket. In this quiet sanctuary, the past and present merged into a single, tranquil moment of stillness. The world outside continued its endless cycle, but here, in this small room, everything was perfectly calm. The silence was not empty, but filled with the quiet presence of history and the promise of rest. It was a space designed for the soul to find its way back to a state of natural harmony. The gentle light faded slowly as the day turned into night, leaving the room in a soft, blue twilight. The flame of the lamp continued to burn steadily, a small beacon of warmth in the growing darkness. The quiet of the room deepened, inviting a deep and restful sleep to those who entered its peaceful embrace. The stories of my conquests would remain, but my personal struggles had ended. The historical record may be silent, but the peace I found was real. I drifted into a slumber that was free from the cares of men. The lamp burned low as the night deepened over the quiet house. The olive leaves continued their soft rustling in the gentle evening breeze. It was a perfect end to a life that had known much action. Now only the stillness remained, holding me in its gentle and warm embrace. The silence stretched out unbroken and complete until the morning light. The journey of my life had reached its quiet and final harbor. I closed my eyes, letting the darkness bring a deep and restful sleep. There was no fear in the night, only the gentle rhythm of the wind and the steady beat of my own heart. The legacy of my life was not in the statues or the triumphs, but in the quiet dignity of these final days. I had served the empire with honor, and now I served the silence with equal devotion. The end was not a defeat, but a completion. The cup was full, and it was time to set it down. The wind outside continued to blow, carrying the scent of the sea and the promise of a new day. But here, in the quiet, there was only rest. The gray sky of the Scottish Highlands hangs low, pressing down upon the eroded plateau where my fortress once commanded the valley. Rain falls gently here, a soft rhythm that has worn the stone foundations into dust over centuries. The Tay River flows nearby, its dark waters carrying the memory of Roman legions marching in disciplined ranks long ago. Moss now covers the fragmented remains of granaries and barracks that once housed thousands of soldiers. The wind moves softly through these ruins, whispering of supply depots and the Glen Blocker strategy I once ordered. No sound of the blacksmith's hammer or the centurion's shout disturbs this stillness. The earth holds the faint impressions of wooden posts beneath layers of accumulated soil. A profound peace settles over the site. As the light fades into the evening twilight, shadows lengthen across the plateau, marking the passage of centuries since my occupation ended. The silence is deep and absolute, broken only by the distant call of a lone bird. Stones seem to rest in a state of eternal slumber, undisturbed by the modern world. The landscape itself became a monument to the ambitions of a man who sought to conquer the north. The river continues its slow journey toward the sea, indifferent to the history it has witnessed. The fortress remains a silent guardian of the past, watching over its own fears and the precarious nature of power. I remember the recall to Rome by the Emperor Domitian, a summons that felt like a cold hand on my shoulder. The emperor felt a deep jealousy regarding my military successes in the north, a jealousy that grew in the shadows of the palace. My personal beliefs remain largely obscured by the silence of the surviving documents, yet I know what I felt. The historical record offers very little detail regarding the private character of the man I was. Scholars often note that the available texts focus heavily on my public military career instead. My daily habits or morning routines were never described with any precision by the scribes. No specific accounts survive that detail how I spent my evenings at home in those final years. My family life is similarly absent from the written narratives of my time. The texts provide no information about my children or my spouse, though they were my world. Some later accounts suggest I faced significant personal struggles while serving abroad in the cold. I was eventually recalled to Rome by the Emperor Domitian, who feared my growing reputation. The emperor felt a deep jealousy regarding my military successes in the north, a jealousy that festered in silence. The late afternoon sun casts long, golden shadows across the marble floor of a quiet Roman atrium. A single clay oil lamp sits on a low wooden table, its flame flickering with a soft, steady rhythm. Outside the open window, the gentle rustle of olive leaves provides a soothing backdrop to the stillness of the room. The air smells faintly of dried lavender and old parchment, evoking a sense of deep, timeless peace. Dust motes dance slowly in the shaft of light that enters from the high clerestory window. A small bronze statue of a sleeping figure rests on a pedestal near the wall, its expression serene and untroubled. The silence of the room is profound, broken only by the distant rhythmic chirping of crickets in the garden. This quiet space seems to exist outside the rush of the bustling city, offering a sanctuary for rest and reflection. The soft texture of the woven wool rug beneath the feet invites one to sit and simply breathe. The warmth of the fading sunlight on the stone walls creates a comforting embrace for the weary traveler. Time seems to slow down in this peaceful corner, allowing the mind to wander without purpose or urgency. I avoided the public eye and refused to seek out new military commands or governorships after my return. The great general I once was retreated into the sphere that once defined his career. I spent my remaining time in the company of friends, and in the quiet study of philosophy. My wife and daughter remained close to me. During this period of enforced retirement and domestic peace, the historical record suggests that I died on the 23rd day of August in the year 93. I passed away in the region of Gallia Narbonensis at the age of 53 years. Some ancient sources whispered that my death occurred under suspicious circumstances shortly after my return to Rome. These accounts suggest that I may have been poisoned by the command of the jealous Emperor Domitian. The rumor persisted that the emperor could not bear the virtue and popularity of the former governor. Yet other historians note that the text does not offer definitive proof of such a violent end. The silence of the official records leaves the exact nature of my passing open to interpretation. My legacy survived not through statues or triumphs, but through the written biography of my son-in-law. Tacitus composed a detailed account of my life to preserve the memory of his father-in-law. This work served as a subtle critique of the tyrannical reign of Domitian and the loss of liberty. The biography highlighted the virtues of a man as a model of Roman citizenship under difficult times. It celebrated the ability to serve the empire with honor while maintaining one's own moral integrity. The text described the character as a blend of military prowess and administrative wisdom. It portrayed a man who could navigate the dangers of imperial politics with caution and grace. My life became a testament to the possibility of dignity even within a corrupt system. The story of my recall and subsequent quiet death resonated with many Romans living under Domitian. They saw in my fate a reflection of their own fears and the precarious nature of power. The narrative of my final years emphasized the importance of private virtue over public acclaim. It suggested that true greatness lay in the integrity of one's character rather than in military conquest. The silence of my last days contrasted sharply with the noise of my earlier campaigns in Britain. I found peace in the quiet corners of the empire where I could reflect on my achievements. My death marked the end of an era of significant Roman expansion in the northwestern frontier. The memory of my governance in Britain remained a source of pride for the Roman people. My methods of building roads and forts continued to shape the landscape of the province for centuries. The gentle rhythm of my later life offered a counterpoint to the violent history of the Flavian dynasty. My story concluded with a sense of calm acceptance of the inevitable passage of time. The world moved on, but the lessons of my life remained embedded in the Roman consciousness. The great general who once marched through the snows now rests in the quiet earth. The stone walls of the villa stand as a testament to a life fully lived and then let go. The fire in the hearth burns low, casting long shadows that stretch across the floor. The night air cools the stone, bringing a fresh scent of pine and rain from the garden. The stars begin to appear, one by one, like distant campfires in a vast sky. The silence returns, deep and absolute, wrapping the house in a blanket of peace. The memories fade into the background, leaving only the sound of the wind and the soft crackle of the dying embers. The man who was once a general is now just a memory, a story told in the quiet of the night. The empire rises and falls, but the peace of the evening remains constant and enduring. The name I carried in life has changed, its shape since the breath left my body. It is no longer the sound of a command given to legions or the whisper of a governor in a distant province. It has become a quiet echo that travels through the halls of history, carried by the hand of my son-in-law. He took up the pen when my hands could no longer hold a sword, and he wrote the story of my life with a care that felt like a gentle touch on a weary shoulder. That book, written in the dark years after my death, became the vessel that held my memory when the world tried to forget. It was not a list of battles or a record of territory gained, but a portrait of a man who tried to live with honor. The ink on those pages has faded, yet the spirit of the words remains clear, a steady light in the long night of centuries. I watch from a distance as the story of my life is read by eyes that never knew the smell of the Scottish rain or the taste of the northern wind. The narrative has grown beyond the man I was, becoming something larger, something that belongs to the world rather than to one family. The silence of the sources regarding my own artistic pursuits is absolute, and this silence has become part of the legacy I leave behind. I never painted, nor did I carve stone with my own hands to leave a mark that would outlast my years. My life was measured in the stability of the provinces I governed and the roads I built for the empire. The culture of my time valued the collective achievement of the state over the personal creativity of the individual, and I was a man of that culture. There are no sketches of mine hidden in archives, no letters where I describe the beauty of a landscape in the way a poet might. The historical record is consistent in this omission, forcing us to look instead at the life I lived through action. This absence allows the focus to remain on the service I rendered to Rome, a service that was practical and enduring. The lack of personal artistic records does not diminish the significance of the work that was done, for the work itself was the art. The administration of justice, the building of cities, the integration of distant lands into the fabric of the empire. These were the strokes of the brush that defined my existence. A heavy wool rug lies folded in the corner of a quiet room in a museum far from where I once walked. The texture is rough and thick, woven from the wool of sheep that grazed on hills I once commanded. The colors are muted, a deep indigo that has softened with time, and small flecks of gold thread catch the light of a single lamp. Dust settles slowly on the surface, creating a soft, gray blanket that hides the intricate patterns of the weave. The room is cool and still, the air smelling faintly of old wood and the dry scent of preserved paper. Shadows stretch across the floor, long and soft, merging with the darkness that fills the corners of the space. A glass case stands nearby, reflecting the dim light, holding a small bronze coin that bears the face of an emperor I served. The coin is worn smooth by the fingers of thousands of people who have looked at it over the years. Their touch a silent conversation across time. The silence here is not empty, but filled with the quiet presence of history. A space where the past and present merge into a single, tranquil moment. The rug invites one to sit and simply breathe, to let the cares of the world fall away like the dust that settles on the floor. The influence of that life and of the story written about it has rippled out in ways I could never have imagined. The values of duty and integrity that guided my steps have become a foundation for those who came after, shaping the way men think about service and leadership. The narrative of my life has been studied by scholars who seek to understand the values of the Roman elite, finding in my story a mirror for their own times. It is a strange thing to see one's own life become a lesson for strangers, a guide for those who walk paths I never traveled. The biography has survived the collapse of empires and the rise of new nations, a testament to the power of a well-told story. It has become a monument to the love and respect of a son-in-law for his father. In law, a bond that transcended the grave. The text does not contain any verifiable claims about great works of art or personal creativity, yet it stands as a masterpiece of moral character. The style is dark and original, focusing on the inner life of a man rather than the external trappings of power. This focus has allowed the story to endure, finding resonance in the hearts of readers who seek meaning in the quiet moments of a life well lived. The world has changed so much since the day I closed my eyes in Gallia Narbonensis. The empire that was my entire world has dissolved into dust, and the languages I spoke are now spoken only in the halls of universities. Yet the story of my life remains a small island of continuity in a sea of change. It is a reminder that while empires fall, the values of a human life can endure if they are written down with care. The silence of the sources regarding my art allows the focus to remain on the administrative and military legacy, a legacy that is measured in the stability of the provinces and the lives of the people I served. The historical record remains consistent in its omission of any artistic training or stylistic development, reinforcing the view that my life was dedicated to the practical needs of the state. This dedication was my art, my way of leaving a mark on the world that would outlast the stone and the bronze. The narrative of my life continues to be studied for its insights into Roman governance and imperial expansion, offering a window into the values and priorities of a distant age. The study of my life provides a glimpse into the world that was a world of duty and honor that has long since passed. The sun sets over the hills of Forum Juliae, casting a golden light on the ruins of the villa where I was born. The stones are warm from the day's heat, and the air is filled with the scent of lavender and rosemary that has grown wild for centuries. Bees hum lazily around the flowers, their sound a constant, soothing rhythm that has not changed since my time. The light fades slowly, turning the sky from gold to deep blue, and the first stars appear in the vast, dark dome above. The silence of the night is heavy and comforting, wrapping around the world like a soft, warm blanket. In this quiet, the past and present merge into a single, tranquil moment of stillness. The story of my life is now a part of this silence, a whisper that travels through the ages, carried on the wind that moves through the olive trees. It is a story of a man who served his empire, who lived with honor, and who was remembered with love. The silence after the last sentence feels earned, a peaceful end to a long and winding journey. The world outside continues its endless cycle, but here, in this small corner of the mind, everything is perfectly calm.